Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone clearly crossed a line? They disrespected your time, took advantage of your kindness, or casually dismissed your feelings. The natural, biological human response in that moment is anger. But instead of getting mad, you freeze. You swallow the heat rising in your chest. You immediately start making excuses for them. You rationalize their behavior. You blame yourself. And most importantly, you smile. You tell yourself it isn't a big deal. You let it go. Society is incredibly quick to praise this. We are told that never getting angry makes you the bigger person. We are conditioned to assume that a lack of anger means you are peaceful, highly agreeable, and emotionally mature. We idolize the peacekeeper. But when you walk away from that interaction, you don't feel peaceful. You feel a profound, heavy, quiet exhaustion. And late at night, your mind races, replaying the conversation over and over, filled with the things you wish you had said. At first glance, it is easy to assume you just hate conflict, or that you are simply a nice person, but that explanation doesn't quite land. Because if you were truly at peace with what happened, you wouldn't feel the crushing weight of resentment afterward. What if I told you that your inability to express anger is not a sign of emotional purity, but a highly evolved, deeply protective psychological response? What if your nervous system isn't avoiding conflict because you are calm, but because it is desperately trying to keep you from shattering entirely? Before we uncover the hidden psychology behind why your mind pulls the emergency brake on your own anger, I want you to do something right now. Drop a comment below and tell me, what is the one boundary people constantly cross that secretly infuriates you, but you always pretend you are okay with? To understand why you swallow your anger, we have to look back at how your nervous system was programmed in the first place. This behavior doesn't appear out of nowhere. It starts in a childhood where your authentic emotions were treated as a threat. Anger is a natural, healthy boundary. It is a biological signal that says, this is not okay. But for you, anger was dangerous. Perhaps you grew up in a home with emotionally volatile adults, where taking up space or showing frustration resulted in punishment or chaos. Or perhaps you grew up with fragile parents, and you learned early on that if you showed anger, the adults around you would fall apart, and you would be left entirely alone. When a child is consistently put in charge of the emotional regulation of the household, they develop hypervigilance. You learned to read the tension in the room before the adults even spoke. You learned that love was conditional on your compliance. Your survival depended on reading the mood, not expressing your own. But here is the psychological truth. When a child is not allowed to be angry, they do not stop feeling anger. The emotion doesn't just evaporate. They simply learn that it is unsafe to direct that anger outward, so they turn it inward. You learned that a smile was a shield. You learned that your needs were a burden, and that your role in life was to fix, manage, and tolerate. So what happens to the child who was never allowed to be angry when they grow up? They develop a very specific set of psychological traits that often look like strengths to the outside world, but feel like a prison from the inside. The first trait is an extreme form of compassion fatigue. You become the emotional container for everyone around you. You are the therapist friend, the reliable one, the one who never complains. Because you were trained to suppress your own boundaries, you have an endless tolerance for other people's dysfunction. Neuroscience tells us that the brain has a mirror neuron system that allows us to feel empathy, but it doesn't distinguish between healthy empathy and destructive empathy. Your highly sensitive brain absorbs all the anger and tension in the room, and your nervous system literally waves a white flag, trying to signal, "I am not a threat, please do not hurt me." You sacrifice your own rest, your own peace, just to make sure everyone else is okay.
You don't do this because you are an endless well of kindness. You do it because your nervous system is terrified of the conflict that would arise if you said no. This leads us to the second trait, a fascinating psychological paradox. Because you cannot express anger cleanly and directly, it leaks out in other ways. Often, this looks like sudden silent exits. Psychologists informally refer to this as the door slam. For a highly observant, deeply sensitive mind, boundaries are often invisible. You don't fight when someone disrespects you, you just quietly gather evidence. You notice the lack of reciprocity. You give them silent opportunities to correct their behavior, and you wait. You tolerate the imbalance for months or even years, swallowing your discomfort, until one day the emotional container is completely full, and the door doesn't close slowly, it slams. Your emotional attachment to that person simply evaporates. You cut them off completely, and you feel a massive wave of relief. People assume you are cold or unforgiving, but the reality is exactly the opposite. You didn't cut them off because you lacked empathy. You cut them off because you cared entirely too much, and your nervous system simply ran dry. It's an act of extreme emotional preservation. But there is a hidden trap here, a quiet cliffhanger that deep thinkers and highly independent minds often fall into. When you suppress your anger for a lifetime, it doesn't just disappear. Energy cannot be destroyed, it only changes form. Anger turned inward transforms into chronic self-criticism. It becomes the voice at 3 a.m. that decides to replay every awkward conversation from 6 years ago. You dissect every word, every pause, wondering if people secretly hate you. You build a case against yourself, collecting evidence that you are somehow defective or fundamentally unworthy of connection. When you aren't allowed to be angry at the people who hurt you, you become angry at yourself for letting them do it. You become your own worst critic, and the courtroom never closes. You convince yourself that one stumble in conversation means you are fundamentally broken, essentially gaslighting yourself with your own memories. This is the dark side of being the nice person. Kindness without boundaries is not kindness at all. It becomes a subtle form of self-destruction. It's like watering every plant in the garden except your own roots. Eventually, the gardener collapses and the entire garden withers with them. This brings us to the most agonizing trait of all, the deep, quiet fear of your own capacity for rage. You have spent your entire life pushing the monster down into the basement of your psyche. You are terrified that if you ever let the anger out, if you ever truly express how exhausted and resentful you are, you will destroy everything. You fear you will become just like the volatile adults you grew up trying to manage. So you retreat, you isolate, you fall in love with your empty house because peace feels better than the hard work of vulnerability. You convince yourself that you are better off entirely alone, because if you don't talk to anyone, no one can cross your boundaries, and you will never have to risk getting angry. But true kindness and true healing must include yourself. Experiencing a sudden wave of anger doesn't mean you are toxic, out of control, or broken. It simply means you are unlearning a lifetime of self-neglect. It means you are unlearning a lifetime of managing everyone else's comfort. Anger is not your enemy. Anger is the part of you that loves yourself enough to say, "I deserve better." It is the bodyguard of your self-worth. When you feel that heat rising in your chest, it is not a sign that you are becoming a bad person. It is a signal that your inner child is finally speaking up, demanding the protection they never received. The ultimate goal of psychological growth isn't learning how to be endlessly calm, and it isn't learning how to effortlessly cut people off in silence. It is learning to sit with your anger without running from it. It is learning to set boundaries so early and so clearly that you never have to reach the point of an explosive, silent exit. It is replacing the safety of complete isolation with the bravery of authentic, messy, deeply human connection. You are not broken for feeling angry. You are simply a deep thinker in a heavy, fast-moving world, learning how to exist without demanding perfection from your nervous system. You are allowed to take up space, you are allowed to be inconvenient, and you are allowed to be mad. If this video helped you recognize yourself or understand someone you love, you are not alone here. This channel is a space for understanding the quieter psychological patterns that shape how we think, connect, and move through the world. If you found this meaningful, consider subscribing so you do not miss future conversations. And remember to drop a comment below about your own journey. Your perspective might help someone else finally feel understood. Thank you for watching.